Hello, this is Alex from cables.gl. I want to talk to you about physically based rendering inside cables. Yeah, so now we finally have this awesome new material. Big thanks to a majestic C Flap who created this material with our team. And now we can use image based, physically accurate lighting with textures in our projects. And that doesn't mean we are really moving away from the usual workflow that we're used to with, for example, being able to animate different textures inside a material or even creating our own or applying some effects like color areas or doing animations with our GLTF scenes. We're working really hard to kind of integrate it completely into our cables kind of workflows that we're all used to, but get this really cool effect of kind of very realistic looking materials that use textures to kind of shape the way the light that they take from a photo based lighting texture. So, for example, like an HDRI or an EXR. So it takes kind of real life properties of a material and then uses textures to make something visually very pleasing on your screen. So right here, I just kind of set up some models from a really cool website I'm going to show you in a sec. And I tried to create a completely procedural floor here, and it looks pretty good. Then we'll look at it later. And then I just wanted to show that you can apply shadows as well onto these materials, and it looks pretty sweet. You can get a kind of approximation or some sort of nice tricks going to make your scene seem a bit more lifelike. And what else here? Oh yeah, and here I just wanted to show that, yeah, you can kind of do animated things with models. So let's say we just want to get started from scratch. I highly recommend checking out a website called polyhaven.com. And here it's a great collection of HDRIs, textures, and models that you can use to help learn this new way of putting together a material that I'll show you in a sec. So definitely check this website out, browse around, grab some of these files, and let's just jump right into it. So what do we need? We need a main loop. I'm going to press that, push that into my editor with Shift Enter and keep my search open. Then I'm going to look for PBR. I'm going to put down a PBR Environment Light operator and then a PBR material. These two operators are what we need to get started. And I did show you the website and some of these kind of pre-made projects earlier, but I was using 3D models that I downloaded, right, or an artist created. That's not necessary. You can, of course, use the 3D models inside cables, so like spheres and cubes and things like that, maybe some sort of even generative stuff. That all works. So let's see. We get errors right away. Why? Let's click on this environment operator and look at the parameter field. Let me just maybe make this a bit more visible for us. So it's complaining, no environment texture connected. So that's very important. These things use kind of a special format for their texture where they use all of the available channels. So red, green, blue, and then also alpha to pack as much information as they can into the texture and then use that to generate like a super nice, juicy looking lighting, image-based lighting for our material, which is down here. And here you also see that there's no PBR pre-commute environment setup found in the branch. And that's because we didn't fix this error yet. So what can we do? Let's say we don't want to browse Polyhaven at the moment. No problem. We'll open up the default library in cables and then just drop down maybe this Studio, and all we do is we plug it in and the errors go away. So why they went away is because now we have this PBR environment light, which you need to kind of have above all of your PBR materials, because that's basically your lighting system that you're setting up for your material. If you put it above, it doesn't really logically make sense, right? It doesn't know where to look for that environment. So keep that in mind when you're setting this up. It needs to be above your PBR material. And if you're going to add more objects with also PBR materials, then once you start adding them below your environment light, they're all kind of inheriting the environment that you've set up with this operator here. You can pretty much ignore all the settings here. They're a little bit advanced, even for me, but they're mostly for optimizing things. So if you see smaller numbers in these dropdowns, that usually means you're going to have lower resolution textures that are going to be used for the PBR materials to approximate their physical qualities, right, on your 3D models. So if you know that your maybe 3D model is going to be really small in your project, or it's not very important for you to have super high fidelity, then of course you can lower all these numbers, but the defaults are fine. So we can leave that alone for now. What else? So let's see. We're going to make this preview bigger and continue on. I'm just going to ignore the PBR material right now. All I did was place it below my environment light. So let's put down maybe a triangle sphere and see what happens. Bam. So it's already looking pretty interesting. It's got some like dual light setup. There's some already rim light going on here. And this is all coming from this Studio Small. Oh yeah, look at that. So you can barely see this texture. And that's, again, because it's using RGBE for the encoding of the data inside, or the values inside the file. So in our preview, we're seeing the alpha being applied to the texture. So it's supposed to look like that. Don't worry. Let's just quickly open back our library, click on our texture, and then I'll click here on the file and pick another HDR environment inside this RGB file format. So you see it starts to switch the way the material looks. And if you've seen the matcap material, it's sort of kind of similar family of a way to do lighting. I would say like PBR is just a universe above matcaps in terms of the creative freedom, and also like the complexity of the stuff you can do with the different textures to control the material itself. Well, let's stay with this one for now. So what can we do with this PBR material? And maybe I'll make my sphere a bit smaller, and I'll just put down a translate here, or transform, sorry. So I'll scale it down, and then look at the PBR material parameter panel. So what do we have? We have a color, we have an alpha, so that is, the transparency of our model that is getting the material. Then we have a roughness, and then we have a metalness. Those are kind of interesting. And then we have some parameters to kind of help out once you get into more advanced mapping of your normal maps onto the material to kind of make the model look even better. So sometimes you need to toggle these on, sometimes off. It's pretty much just visual. If it looks better, leave it on. If it looks worse, leave it off. So then we have this alpha mode. So the alpha mode has quite a few options here. And right now we're in opaque mode. And then when I turn on blend mode, we see kind of smooth fade out of the 3D model. And if we do dither, then we're using another way of kind of applying transparency to our object. And in this case, it kind of dithers away parts of the model. So also basically up to you, and whatever you like. whatever looks best, it's fine. I think it's quite performative, this material. It looks really cool, and it even works in WebGL 1.0, which is kind of nuts. But you should just definitely make it look as good as you can and not really worry about the performance stuff. It's all quite good. Well, a note about the performance stuff, since it's all texture based, and of course at the moment I'm not using many textures other than this environment here, you're basically going to be dealing with maybe larger file sizes if you're going to be using like 4K maps or 2K maps for your textures. So that's like large pixel size textures. You have to keep that in mind. And with something like this RGBE, maybe you don't even need a really large map. You could convert a smaller HDRI that you have. And by the way, and that's let's say that's a transition. So HDRI, how do we get this PBR light environment? Let's say we're like kind of bored of these default ones. We want a new one. So let's use Polyhaven and just find one that we like. So I'll grab maybe this really interesting Circus Arena HDR. And here we have two options, HDR and EXR. And for this operator, I advise using HDR. And then we will download a 1K file. So if you have something like Photoshop or something like that that can work with HDR files, then you can definitely make it even smaller. And you're going to sacrifice some detail in your lighting, but that's at least you get a smaller file. So now we have this HDR. So we can't use HDR directly inside WebGL in cables. So we will just drag this in and see what happens. We're uploading this HDR straight out of Polyhaven, and bam, we have an auto-converted RGBE format texture that we can use with our PBR environment light. So let's place that down and see what happens. And you see, instead of that HDR, now we have this really funky encoded texture. So let's plug this one in, and now we have our Circus Arena applied to our sphere here. And let me put down an orbit control, and then we'll spin around the sphere a bit. So the interesting thing is the PBR material, right? So what kind of things can we do? We can apply a different color, of course, and then we can apply the roughness and make the ball super shiny, almost mirror-like. We can take away the metalness of the material so it turns more plastic or stone. And then we also have all the way at the bottom of the parameter panel some controls for the intensity of the color or the diffuse of the material, and then also the influence of this environment light onto the material. So if you're going for like a super photorealistic look, you might want to adjust this, but usually you don't have to. If the artists have created the material textures very well, then it's just super easy to use. And that was kind of, I assume the whole point of PBR is as long as everything is kind of standardized in the way shininess and the height of the normal maps and direction and everything like that is standardized, then you should be able to just throw in objects with different materials into a single scene with a single environment light, and then stuff just looks like it's in the same space together, and you don't need to really fiddle around with this stuff. But definitely you can, which is a good tool to have. So let's think, what else should I show you with this? Of course, the input texture ports here on the PBR material. You'll see that the environment light has 3 outputs, and then this PBR material has 3 inputs in this area. And they're the image-based lighting lookup table, the cube map diffuse irradiance, and then cube map pre-filtered environment map. And you see that we're not actually connecting these together. And let me just copy paste this down here and lazily put it down below my triangle sphere, and maybe put down I don't know, just a normal sphere, just to see what happens when I compare these triangle and regular spheres. And then I'll put a transform because I'm pretty sure one is inside the other. There he is. So there is my other sphere. It has the same material, right? So they look exactly the same. But if I start adjusting the properties of this second sphere, you see it's also kind of looking like it's in the same, well, obviously, it's in the same circus arena as this other ball. So that's kind of the whole thing we thought of here, that connecting these ports would be a little bit too much work if we're basically working with materials that are in the same space. So you can save yourself a lot of time and just ignore this stuff and stack your materials under the PBR environment light, and then they will inherit the circus arenas that you apply to your environment light. And of course, if you want to then maybe use a different material, but maybe keep it the same stack, then you can plug in custom textures into this port here. And let's look at these other super important, super interesting ports. So we have an albedo, which is the diffuse, also it's called sometimes, or it's basically the texture material or the colors of the model that are mapped to a texture. So for example, if we look over at the TV here, this is our diffuse or albedo, where the wood and the metal have a certain color applied to the material, but it's still the same material. So we didn't have to set different materials for our object. It's all the same material with just UVs and textures telling where to put the albedo color. And yeah, so that's pretty standard. And then we have this AORM texture. And we'll talk about this in a sec because I gotta collect my thoughts. And then this normal map is just any normal GL format or webgl format normal map. So correct me in the comments, but there is some differences in the way applications have the green channel mapped in their normal textures. So sometimes you need to flip that stuff. But you shouldn't really have much problem if you are going to be using at least these polyheaven models for studying the PBR material, or maybe even using these in your projects. Because when you download, for example, we'll click on this pocket watch. When you download the GLTF scene, you will get a folder with all the textures pre-prepared for you. So they have the correct format normals and the correct format AORM RGB texture as well. But if you're going to use this website for doing stuff, I recommend you also grab the blend file, because there you will get the original Blender scene that you can study some more and understand how they're doing some the UV mapping and things like that, and then export that as a GLB from Blender. So then you have one file that you're uploading to Cables, and you don't have two files that Polyheaven provides with this GLTF option, because you get, let me see if I have in downloads, you get a binary, no, it's not a binary, I guess it's the other format, the GLTF format, where it references this bin file, and then the textures, I guess, are in another folder. And what we're going for with Cables is that you have this a single GLB file that already has everything in it, so you don't have to upload separate files for stuff. So here I have this GLB that I got from the Blender file for the TV here. So definitely download both of these if you're going to try it out with Blender and Polyhaven workflow approach. I think you'll save yourself a lot of time. And it's pretty cool because you get to study also how the Blender file is set up and maybe adjust some of the models or maybe like separate them and animate them and stuff in cables. Definitely try that and show it to me. So let's go back to our experiment here. Yeah, so this is pretty much, it was my biggest hurdle, is this AORM texture. And it's basically 3 different maps in one. So you have the AO, which is the ambient occlusion. It kind of tells the material where to put some shading somewhere, or maybe there's some like cavities in your material and that should be darker than the rest of it. Then you have the reflection of the material. So for example, here, this sphere has high reflection, right? Or the roughness, I'm sorry, not the reflection. So it's the roughness of the material. It's very high now. So you get to see the environment reflected almost like a mirror inside this material. And then you have the metalness, which is this other property here, which turns it basically into a silver covered metal. And with this map, which would look like, for example, let's pull this one out, it encodes all those properties into a single file. Because if you may have used Blender or something or another software before, you might be used to black and white masks to tell a shader how to map things out. But this, I think, is a super nice approach where you just combine all those 3 things into one, and you get this really cool looking texture that then controls our scene material and how it looks on a model. And what else? Well, I think I'm just going to publish these files, and then you can kind of look it over, leave a comment if you want me to go over how I put together the kind of the fake floor here or something like that. But definitely just experiment, because those textures, I mean, you can just create them with Image Compose, right? And then you can animate them and do like really cool, crazy, maybe even non-photorealistic, but sort of photorealistic stuff. Yeah, please test it out. Tell us what you think. Enjoy. This is super fun to use. Thank you. Bye.